In this episode, we are going to answer a viewer question about how we're dealing with legacy code.
Guys. You are watching DevTips with me, David and
MPJ.
I'm getting fiber. Well, there are these guys up there. They're doing things. Okay, now it's silent, but I promise you that as soon as I start talking again, they will drill. So today's sponsor is Brilliant, a problem-solving website that teaches you to think like a computer scientist, not like us. When you want to learn more about computer science fundamentals like big O notation, recursion, and that sort of thing, then you should go to brilliant.org/devtips. You're one of the first 200 people that sign up. You will get 20% off the annual subscription. Thank you, Brilliant. Now let's get on with the show.
Your video.
I get the fika served by my mother-in-law.
Oh, nice.
Okay, fika break already.
That's adorable. Oh, that's a big one.
How do you guys approach legacy code? And also, how do you guys go on with the solution? Like, do you guys use JS to manipulate things? Or do you guys change the whole code and the parts that are related to it?
Oh.
Let me just read that again, but just say guys. Guys, 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 guys.
Oh, that's like all the time the comment used guys?
Yeah. Okay, let's just deconstruct this question. Remove the guys. Okay, so basically, how do you guys approach legacy code? Actually, I visited my old employer that I worked for before, the e-commerce website, where I built this horrible returns. I did not build it, but I modified a horrible return system that was built in VB6.
What's a return system?
When people are returning things, so you scan the things that you get into the warehouse, and then you register that the people should get their money back. So that was built in Visual Basic 6.
Oh my god.
And that was old when I modified it in 2010.
Oh,
I guess, 11. I don't remember.
Can we just quickly look at how Visual Basic 6 looks like?
It's like public sub, dim instead of var.
Oh yeah.
Async.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not that bad.
No, it's not. It's not as bad as I remember it.
But the thing is, it felt really old, and it was built in like spaghetti code already. And it took a lot of work to make the modifications I had to do. But the thing is that same program is still running 8 years later, and it had been running for 8 years.
Yeah.
So it's so funny how code is just code. If it works, it will keep on working.
Yeah.
Even afterwards. It doesn't matter if it's bad code or spaghetti code. If it works, it works.
Yeah. I like, just to play devil's advocate to that, is that it might be a disaster waiting to happen.
Yes. It was a disaster when I did it.
Yeah, but let's say, for instance, like did you actually need to, like, what, did you clean it up or did you?
Yes, I cleaned it up as much as I could.
Okay.
Because it was basically a while loop.
Yeah.
That had different states, but it wasn't really documented what kind of states it could have, and then it could sort of rerun itself sometimes. I never quite understood the logic behind it. It was just magic.
Yeah.
It felt like magic. It was running through a bunch of orders and then doing things with them and modify the state, and then it reran them. Yeah, it was a crazy logic.
Yeah, kind of impressive that you didn't just do a rewrite of it.
I wasn't allowed to.
Oh yeah. Developers will always do a rewrite if they're allowed to. Almost every time I've done a rewrite, though, it has turned out to be a mistake. Like it's often, like it's very rare that it's worth it, because the rewrite is like, there's always so much more to a system than it looks like. You think that, oh, this system is simple, but then like the rewrite end up being like this much more complicated thing than you believe, and then you also end up having to maintain the new version in parallel to the old version, like making like your development team do like double duty all the time. So rewrites almost never work.
So how do you deal with legacy code? If we go back to the question.
Hang on. I'm gonna show you something. This
Yes.
It's a very good book. It's really nice. It has a lot of anecdotes or like fables or whatever you want to call them. Like every chapter is self-contained, and so it might be like the case of the undetectable side effect and the case of horrible include dependencies, and it's very nice. It teaches you a lot of techniques, like practical techniques to break legacy code. And he defines legacy code, by the way, as code that is not under test.
Oh, like most code, I guess.
I think that depends on what you mean by most code.
And what do you mean by the under test? There are, of course, parts of code that doesn't really have to be tested as long as something above it is tested, perhaps, or...
Yeah, sure. That's what wrapper classes are for. Like they're meant to contain something that you don't want to test, but you want to test that it interacts correctly with it. But testing like shoving in the actual thing would be hard, so you instead wrap it in the wrapper class and pass that in. But like, working with legacy code is a really good book that teaches you a lot of practical.
Can I apply that to, like, if I have a JavaScript project? Like for me, looking at the book, it just looks Microsoft or Fortran. It just looks old. Can I use that for whatever I'm building if I'm building a web project?
Yeah, I would say so. Like all of these are like it's
I'm sort of terrified by the look of the book.
Yeah, but it's chapters like if you're terrified, you can actually read chapter 4, We Feel Overwhelmed. And it isn't going to get any better. Like it's I think that it's kind of timeless actually. It doesn't really matter what language you're using or what paradigm you're using.
Approaching legacy code.
I have an episode called how to work with how to get into an existing code base. Basically a situation where you find yourself in a workplace, like a new code base, and you just need to, get into it and start working with it. Try to get assigned a buddy, like a person that knows the code base and preferably has agreed to, or maybe even been given explicit time by their manager to help you, be like your point of contact, that you ask, basically the ask silly questions person. And when you're developing, keep a little timer or something, and keep tabs on yourself, and give yourself like this contract at, if I am stuck for this amount of minutes, then I'm gonna ask my buddy.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty smart.
Because I tend to like go like this macho route and try to think that I can just solve things by thinking harder at them.
Yeah, but it's more efficient to actually ask someone else and not just be stuck with a thing for a day.
Yeah, because you don't really know if the problem is if you're stuck with something for 15 minutes. And I'm not talking like thinking about something, but I'm thinking about like actually stuck. You're not making any progress at all for 15 minutes. Then you are probably gonna be stuck the entire day with that thing.
Yeah.
That might not be because you're inadequate. It might be that you are just lacking information and context around why this is a problem.
But the difficult part is, so with my example from the VB6 application, was that no one knew how that application worked because the one that built it had stopped working several years ago.
Yeah.
How do you do then? Perhaps, I guess, you should like double down on it, so like it get another pair of eyes to just... You need reinforcement. Yeah,
like it's important to. It might be that somebody might be somewhat familiar with it, and you can get access to that. You should absolutely not get into that if you're the one new person at the workplace, because then you have been handed the shit sandwich that has been passed around for like months, and nobody wants to do it, and then it's just automatically given to you because you don't have the good sense to say no. Let's say that you're not new and it just happens to be a new code base that you don't know anything about. Then I think then you need to go into archaeology mode. Don't expect progress. Like it's gonna take this is now, everything is going to take like not 3.14 times longer like software development usually does. It's gonna take like 30 times longer to do anything. So make sure that anything you communicate, any expectations that you communicate to like any team lead or anything, like if they have, make sure that they don't have the expectation that this is going to be easy.
Yeah.
Um,
And if it's an isolated system, you should perhaps consider to just rebuilding it, even though that sounds stupid.
yeah.
To like, but we have all this, it's working. Perhaps in that case, it can be smarter to rebuild it from scratch.
If the code is like absolutely like extremely high risk to change without breaking it, and you need to make a lot of changes to it, maybe it's a system dealing with like GDPR, and you need to like do a lot of things in order to make it privacy compatible, then you probably need a rewrite. It might also be that the code, like I've actually been in situations where there wasn't even a code base. Yeah, it was just a piece of software that somebody had built that was doing processing in an organization.
Oh, there was no code, you couldn't modify it. It was just this program that was running.
Exactly. They have lost the code, the source code.
Oh god.
Yeah, they had their CRM system was built in Smalltalk and Danish. So what I did was that I had a lot of, it was used a lot. There was a lot of input files and output files. So I basically just took the input files and just looked at what output files the software produced. And then I just started writing unit tests and just figuring out like one problem at a time, like very methodically.
Oh, and then you had the tests to see, to understand what you wanted to build. You had the model through the tests.
Exactly.
How long did it take you to come up with that idea?
It felt like the only obvious thing to do, the only obvious way to solve it. And it also turned out to be surprisingly fun. Because it was a slow slog to get through the entire document and all the little exceptions that it had, but and just figure things out. But it was also kind of a little mystery, and it was a kind of like a very constrained problem. You have this file, it goes through this black box. You don't know exactly what the black box does, but you know the output. And then you're going to reproduce the black box.
I wonder if you could use like machine learning to do that. Like you could take a subset of the data and then just train a model so you really don't know what's going on. And then you get the outputs.
That would actually probably have worked. That's actually not a bad idea, because they actually had like years and years and years of inputs and output data. So it might actually have been enough to build a machine learning model to do it. Pretty cool.
We should contact them and say that we have a new idea for you guys. You know the thing I built 10 years ago? Let's rebuild it using ML.
Dude, that company went so bankrupt. Thinking about stuff like the Google, what's it called? The Google Tag Manager thing. Yeah. Which is basically this wrapper that you place on your page so that any goddamn person in your organization...
Yeah, it's a snippet. It's a JavaScript snippet inserter, basically.
Yeah, so that you don't have to be able to deploy the app in order to deploy code in it.
Yes, that's correct.
You can just circumvent...
And then hopefully the people that have access to Google Tag Manager either don't know that much about code, so they can't really mess things up, or they are just trustworthy. And hopefully they have very good passwords so no one can hack them.
Yeah. I don't know. It just, the Google Tag Manager, or the whole concept seems very dubious to me. So you have like, your deployment process is too complicated for a person to, like you can't use the normal...
Yeah, it's too complicated, and the company that you want. So Google Tag Manager is a JavaScript inserter. So you can, through a graphical user interface, you can insert different type of JavaScript and use rules to trigger different things that you want to track. So basically the use case is when a page loads and the user is signed in, perhaps send some metadata about the user, what type of user it is. And then when they click this button, send an event to Google Analytics or Mixpanel or whatever, that they click the button. And why are we doing this? It's because often the development pipeline is constrained in some way, and the developers don't have time, or their team leaders or whoever controls their time don't want to prioritize tracking usage. And that is often because the usage is tied to the marketing department, because the marketing is spending money to get people to the app or site, and then they want to know if they're actually using it.
That was an annoyingly nuanced explanation.
This is often the case, not in all cases, but often it's like, why aren't they tracking the usage of their own thing?
Yeah.
Like, they don't know what to prioritize based on usage. They are basically making hunches or just acting on what management tells them. Like, we have to build this new section of the website, or we have to have support for this filter because I would like to make a facet in this search result or whatever.
Yeah.
It's a lot of based on feelings and not really on any sort of data.
Yeah, I think it's actually like organizational smell, sort of, that if your development team is not concerned with data collection, because that means that you're basically just guessing what the hell you're developing.
Sometimes it is difficult to know what to collect. I know that you know from Spotify it's very easy to just say, oh, let's just collect all the data, every interaction. And you can do that because storage is cheap, but then it gets really, really, really difficult and complicated to actually analyze the data.
Exactly.
So that's also why things like Google Analytics is used to make business decisions, because it's sort of like it has like this limited scope of what it is tracking, and that is good enough for most major decisions, and then that's why you can just use it.
And it's also like a very important distinction is that Google Analytics does tracks very far from everything, and that's by intent. Because it's one thing to, like, it's easy to think that, oh, we're gonna just collect every interaction so they can analyze it later. And as you say, like, and just the wealth of information, analyzing that is part of the problem. But it's also kind of hard to just remember to track everything. Like at Spotify, we when we started initiating an experiment, when we talked about what it was that we wanted to achieve, we actually specified what events and in what order we needed to do things, so that event tracking was built as part of the development process. And this, I should tell you that this was given that we had a system in the app that was intended to track everything. And we always needed to add some fucking event in order to...
Nothing tracks everything.
Yeah, so we always need to add some events.
Yeah, and also the thing with... So we're not just plugging Google Analytics here, but with one of these like drop-in analytics softwares, or you can use Firebase Analytics or something that is not from Google. The thing with that is that often you sort of get like some basic reports, like you don't even, and even though they don't give you what you really want to know, they can sort of like give you a hunch of like, are people at all using this? Which type of people are using this? What kind of devices or whatever? Like that is often better than nothing.
Yeah.
And if you want to build something custom, then each question has to be answered very specifically, and that takes like a database administrator together with a data scientist together with a data analyst, blah blah blah, and then
data analysis and experiments. That's hard. People do not realize at all how many data analysts and data scientists that software development is going to need over the coming 10 years.
Yeah.
It's just ludicrous. The teams that I've been in that managed to move their mindset from our feature to a feature or an experiment turned out to be much better development teams that managed to drop unsuccessful features a lot faster, and they also it was also a lot less judgy atmosphere, because everybody was more relaxed to like focus more on their work rather than like upholding features.
I think you're right.
That's enough. That's all we have time for today.
You should go check out brilliant.org/devtips. Be one of the first 200 people that sign up, and you will get 20% off the annual subscription.
Tell us in the comments, like you, the viewer, tell us in the comments a story that you had about legacy code. Like we would love to hear that. This was an episode of DevTips. We release this every Friday morning. You should subscribe so that you don't miss it. And that's it. I am MPJ.
And I'm David. See you in the next video.